This is a really big opportunity. Elena, you can do it. Elena Park quietly encouraged herself on the plane and was confident that her business would succeed. Although it was a flight back to Korea after completing overseas expansion, she was confident that her company would achieve great results in the global market through this business trip. But her sense of relief was shattered by the sudden shaking of the aircraft. Dear passengers, we are currently preparing for an emergency landing due to an aircraft defect. Please remain calm and wear your seatbelt. Although the captain's calm voice rang through the in-flight speakers, the anxious passengers were not easily eased. Elena looked out the window. All that was visible below was dense forest and canyons. Can we land in a place like this? Her mind was tangled with all kinds of worries. The plane eventually landed roughly in an open space located in a small canyon. The impact was not large and everyone was safe, but the surrounding environment felt unfamiliar and threatening. Elena got off the plane following the flight attendant's instructions and looked around. Where the hell am I? Her question was a prelude to unpredictable events to come. Elena Park got off the plane and was deeply confused and scared. The unfamiliar canyon and the surrounding giant trees were intimidating to her, and the crew and other passengers were rushing to explore the surroundings, looking for a way to call for help. But this place seemed like a completely isolated area. My cell phone had no signal, and there wasn't even a shadow of a helicopter visible in the sky. How could I fall into a place like this where no one is around? She muttered without realizing it, but she didn't have time to think for long. One of the flight attendants said loudly, "I can't stay here for long. The weather is likely to worsen and the area appears to be in no-fly zone. Everyone needs to move." Elena realized that she had no choice but to follow the crowd. She was dismayed that everything she had ever relied on had become useless. Company, fame, wealth. Nothing helped in this isolated situation. They went deeper and deeper into the canyon. The surroundings became increasingly dark, and unfamiliar sounds echoed in the forest. One passenger asked anxiously, "Are we really safe?" The crew tried to ignore the words, but fear was written on everyone's faces. At that moment, movement was seen beyond the forest. A group was approaching. At first, I thought they were a rescue team, but their clothes and behavior seemed far from that of a rescue team. They were strangers in military uniform. Their attitude was hostile. They approached the crowd shouting something. "Hurry, step back." The crew desperately tried to protect the passengers, but they were already surrounded. Elena heard someone's voice behind her. "This is not just an accident. There's a hidden story here." One of the people in military uniform began to look at Elena. They seemed to sense something special about her appearance and behavior. At this moment, she realized that her location was not just a strange land, but a hostile environment. She was in much greater danger than she thought. Elena was surrounded by unfamiliar soldiers and desperately tried to understand the situation. However, conversation with them who did not speak the language hit a wall. Just because her accent was different, the soldiers' eyes grew increasingly suspicious and hostile. "Where are you from?" A man in military uniform asked in broken Korean. There was a threatening tone in his tone. Elena tried to speak, but no voice came out. She had no choice but to remain silent, as if she were afraid that her situation would worsen. At that time, a man came from behind the group. Unlike other soldiers, he maintained a calm demeanor and observed Elena. His name was Junho Min, a young officer leading the local defense unit. He was looking at Elena with curiosity rather than suspicion. "Don't put more pressure on her here," Haman said gently but firmly. At his command, the other soldiers retreated for a moment. "I will investigate it myself. Everyone, please leave." Haman approached Elena and whispered quietly, "I'm trying to understand why you're here. Trust me and answer honestly." His tone was different from that of previous soldiers, and it felt like he was trying to gain trust. Elena decided to tell him everything to get out of her situation. "I came here simply by accident. I was returning from business in Korea. My plane broke down and I had to make an emergency landing here." "That's it?" Haman nodded and seemed to be considering her words. Although he began to believe that her explanation was true, her presence was still problematic due to local regulations. "It will be dangerous if we leave you here any longer," he warned in a low voice. "I can help you. but at great risk to myself. Elena felt Haman's sincerity in those words. But at the same time, she didn't want to embarrass him. "If my leaving hurts you, I will find another way," she said. Haman shook his head and said, "My choice has already been made. I will do my best to ensure that you leave here safely. But the journey ahead will not be easy." That night, Haman took Elena to his small lodgings. He explained to her why he had deliberately decided to stay here and protect her. "I believe your story is not a lie, but faith alone will not protect you. You must be careful." Elena was grateful for his decision, but at the same time, she became increasingly aware of how precarious their situation was. She had no other choice but to trust him. Haman brought Elena to his quarters and quietly watched his surroundings. Although his position gave him some authority, hiding her in this situation was very dangerous. His accommodations were simple, but safe enough. He opened a small secret space in the house and hid her there. "You can't get out of here," Haman said in a stern tone. "There are a lot of people out there who doubt your existence. You should at least wait until things calm down." Elena sat in the small room he had prepared for her and quietly looked around. The room had minimal items and smelled like old wood. She asked herself in her mind, thinking about her situation, "How long can I last here? And can I trust this man?" That night, Haman explained to Elena how closed and heavily guarded this area, far from the city, was. "This is where I was born," he said calmly. "I've been working here protecting people for a long time, but protecting you now may be the most dangerous decision I've ever made." Elena felt the sincerity in his words, but at the same time, she also realized how complicated and oppressive life was in his hometown. "Why are you helping me?" she asked cautiously. Haman was silent for a moment and then answered, "I knew you weren't lying, and if I left you alone, you wouldn't be able to survive here. That's reason enough." He prepared a simple meal for her, and at the same time reminded himself of his position and responsibilities. "I have always been faithful to my work, but this time is different. This is a decision of my heart." As time passed, the awkwardness between the two gradually disappeared, and their understanding of each other began to build. Through her conversation with him, Elena realized that he had a human side that went beyond simple duty. He was not just a soldier who followed the rules, but a man guided by his own moral convictions. But as their conversation deepened, a crisis was approaching. In the village, the movement to doubt Elena's existence was growing. Some neighbors began to become suspicious of Haman's behavior, and questions began to come from his superiors. "Why do you seem so busy these days?" one of his colleagues asked. "Aren't you hiding something?" Haman tried to calm the situation by smiling calmly, but the fact that he was hiding Elena made his heart heavy. "You have to be careful," he muttered to himself. "I might not be able to last this long." That night, Haman spoke to Elena. "We can't stay here any longer. We need to move you to a safer place. But before that, we need to make a plan." Elena was grateful for his decision, but she also felt afraid. "I don't want to put you in danger. It might be better for you if I leave." "It's already too late," Haman said firmly. "I have decided to help you, so I will take full responsibility until the end." The two began to plan their escape together. It wasn't just about hiding Elena, it was about getting her out of the area completely. However, in this process, unexpected obstacles and moments of choice awaited them. Haman and Elena got to know each other more deeply as they prepared their escape plan. As each day passed, they spent more and more time together. Haman began to tell her about the area where he grew up and what kind of life he had led. "This is where I was born and raised, but actually my dream was to leave here," Haman said in a low voice. "But I had no choice but to stay because of my responsibilities to my family and community." Elena nodded after hearing his words, recalling a similar burden she also felt. She shared that although she grew up in a wealthy family from a young age, she always had to live with her family's expectations. "I had no choice," she said quietly. "Every decision was always made for the benefit of the company and the family." Their conversation became more and more honest. Haman opened up about why he became a soldier and the personal dreams he had to give up in the process. He said he wanted to make his music known to the world one day, but that dream collapsed in reality. Elena resonated deeply with the story and shared her own experience of having to suppress her own aspirations. I always prioritized what I had to do over what I wanted to do, she said. But in this situation, it all feels like it means nothing. That night, they sat quietly in a small room and listened to each other. Even in silence, each other's pain and hope intertwined. This small space became a place where they understood each other better and shared the weight of their lives. But the peaceful moment did not last long. The next morning, Ho-min went out to the village to check on the situation, and when he returned, his expression had darkened. "It's gotten worse," he said firmly. "There are more people on the move trying to find you." He sat close to Elena and explained it in detail like a strategy. "I have to leave here in the next few days. I can't protect you here any longer." The villagers are growing suspicious. Elena was filled with fear as she listened to his words. She understood his decision, but she also knew how dangerous it was to leave. "Can we really leave safely?" she asked cautiously. Ho-min was silent for a moment, and then spoke in a decisive voice. "I will keep my promise. It's my responsibility to send you off safely. But you have to be ready too." Together they began researching escape routes. Ho-min carefully planned the route through the villages she would likely pass through and ways to avoid surveillance. He also taught her the basic survival skills she needed. "You should be able to survive a few days without me," he said seriously. In this process, they were no longer simply in a relationship of giving and receiving help, but were becoming beings who supported each other's lives. But both knew how unrealistic and unstable their relationship was in reality. That night, as Elena lay in bed, she realized how much she depended on this person. At the same time, she thought about the danger and pain he would experience after she left. She promised to herself, "I won't put him in any more danger. I have to do everything I can." The next morning, Ho-min patrolled around the village as usual and checked the situation. But on this day, unlike usual, there was something ominous about it. An unfamiliar military vehicle was stopped near the village entrance, and unfamiliar soldiers were investigating the surroundings. Ho-min's heart began to beat rapidly. "It's finally come." He moved slowly away from the soldiers and watched their movements. It was clear that strangers were looking for Elena. They questioned the villagers and asked if anything strange had happened around the village after the plane crash. Ho-min felt that he had to hurry back to his dorm. When he returned home, Elena was standing next to the window, looking out cautiously. Her face was full of tension and fear. "I heard something strange outside. It seemed like people were coming towards my house." Ho-min tried to calm her down. "You're still safe, but you need to be extra careful tonight. I'm sure they're looking for you." He guided her to a secret space and checked the crack in the door with his hand. "No matter what noise you hear from here, you must not come out. Wait until I return." That evening, Ho-min was summoned to the village hall. Strange soldiers were waiting there, and the person who appeared to be their leader began asking questions to Ho-min. "Have you seen any strange people or situations in this area recently?" Ho-min answered as calmly as possible. "No, this area is very quiet and nothing unusual has happened." But they did not easily believe what he said. "We believe there is a possibility that survivors of the plane crash are hiding here. You know that. We cannot allow that to happen." Ho-min was nervous on the inside, but on the outside he calmly nodded. "I will do my best to prevent that from happening." Late that night, he returned home again. As soon as he entered the house, he called Elena to come out of the secret space. As soon as she saw his face, she knew something was wrong. "What did they say? What did they say?" "We bought time," Ho-min tried to reassure her, but his voice was filled with uncontrollable anxiety. "But they will make more efforts to find you. It will be more dangerous from now on." Ho-min explained his plan to her again. "Tomorrow night, we must leave this village. I have found a way to get you to safety. But to succeed, I need you to follow my instructions perfectly." Elena felt his determination, but at the same time, she was filled with fear. "What if I fail? You'll be in danger too. It's my choice," he said firmly. "You just have to trust and follow." That night, Elena couldn't sleep and kept repeating his words. She realized how much she depended on him and how much he risked for her. But at the same time, it bothered her that she was putting him in danger. She whispered quietly, "Maybe I'm making the wrong choice. I've already changed this person's life just by coming here." But Elena also knew that there was no other way for her to choose. This man, Ho-Min, was her only hope. The next day, Ho-Min began investigating the village's security routes to put his plan into action. He scanned the outskirts of the village to find a safe route to escape with Elena. However, as the soldiers' surveillance became more and more tight, his plans were becoming more complicated. When he returned home, he spoke to Elena. "We don't have much time. If we don't do it tonight, we'll be in even greater danger." Elena nodded at his words, but her expression was full of anxiety. "Well, what are you going to do? You know what happens if you get caught?" Haman looked at her seriously. "This is my choice. Getting you safe is the most important thing to me right now. There is no point in hiding here any longer." He explained his plan to her. "There is an old bridge to the east of town. If you cross that bridge, you will be able to cross the border. But the problem is that there are soldiers near that bridge as well. If we can avoid them, we have a chance of success." Elena fell into deep thought after hearing his words. "Why are you risking all this for me?" she asked cautiously. Haman was silent for a moment, because it was the first time I was asked such a question. He lowered his head and spoke quietly. "It felt right to help you, and maybe I needed to make this choice for myself." His confession surprised Elena. She sensed that he was not only acting for her, but that he was also trying to overcome something within himself. She nodded slowly and said, "I really appreciate you, but I don't want you to regret this." That night, the two quietly began preparing. Ho-Min instructed her to pack lightly and take care to leave as little trace as possible. After checking the village security route again, he decided to leave late that night. When they were ready, Elena looked out the window and said, "I'm scared to leave here, but I think I can do it with you." Haman responded to her words with a brief smile. "If we are together, we will be able to overcome any difficulties that come our way." But at that moment, the sound of footsteps coming from outside interrupted the conversation between the two. It seemed like someone was wandering around the house. Haman immediately motioned to Elena and instructed her to hide. "Stay quiet. I'll go out and check." He opened the door and went out. In the darkness, he spotted two soldiers. They were investigating near his house. Haman calmly approached them. "What's going on here?" One of the soldiers looked at him suspiciously. "The villagers have reported seeing a stranger recently. We have been ordered to be careful to prevent anything strange from happening." Haman answered, pretending to be calm. "There is no problem here. I checked the area around my house myself." The soldiers turned around as if they believed him, but one of them spoke last. "If we have any doubts, we will come back. Then you too will be investigated." Haman watched them leave until the end and then return home. Elena asked, reading the tension on his face, "What did you say? Are you okay?" "I'm still okay," he said, exhaling. "But we don't have much time left. We have to leave now." Hearing his words, Elena picked up her bag and nodded quietly. The two began to walk into the darkness and quietly left the village. Under the moonlight, Haman and Elena walked to the outskirts of the village, trying to keep their footsteps to a minimum. They began walking along the forest path. Haman took the lead and guided the route, and Elena followed behind, constantly looking around. Tension was running high between the two. "Be careful," Haman said in a low voice. "There's a lot of surveillance around here. If you move incorrectly, you could get caught." Elena nodded quietly. Although she was strictly following Haman's instructions, her anxiety was growing more and more in her. The guilt that this was all because of her weight on her. She promised herself, no matter what happens, you must not put him in danger. But not everything went smoothly. Just before they reached the bridge, the two stopped when they heard a voice coming from afar. "Stop!" A soldier's voice rang through the darkness. Their bodies froze at the same time. "Go back!" Haman quickly whispered to Elena. "We have to take a different route." However, the soldiers' movements were rapidly approaching. They were looking for the two people, shining their flashlights around the area. Elena felt like she was suffocating, but Haman held her hand and guided her calmly. "Just trust me. I will protect you." They moved quietly, hiding in the nearby woods. Every time she heard the sound of a tree branch breaking, Elena felt like her heart would stop. However, Haman calmly adjusted his route and eluded the soldiers. He knew this area better than anyone else. When they arrived deep in the forest, The two were able to catch their breath for a moment. But soon I could feel the footsteps getting closer again. They weren't completely safe. Elena asked with a trembling voice. "Can we get out of here?" Haman nodded resolutely. "You can, but you must remain calm. From now on, you must absolutely follow my instructions." They moved as quietly as possible and began looking for a new escape route. But the soldiers were getting closer and closer, and the situation was becoming more and more urgent. At this rate, it seemed likely that they would be found. "It might be better if we split our moves," Elena said suddenly. "I'll lure them in a different direction, and you can get out safely." Haman shook his head after hearing her words. "I can't do that. I told you I would protect you. I can't leave you behind," he said, holding her tightly. "We have to get out together. I won't give up until I get you to safety." Elena felt tears welling up as she listened to his decisive voice. He was risking everything for her. She decided to trust him. "Okay, I'll do as you say." They started moving through the forest again, and finally a bridge came into view. However, soldiers were already stationed near the bridge. They shouted as if they had caught the two people's movements. "Stop!" Haman said, pulling Elena back. "Get ready. We have to run." They suddenly changed direction and started running quickly. Although he could hear the soldiers chasing behind him, Haman never slowed down. He took the lead, using his body as a shield to protect her. Finally, they threw themselves to one side along the river and hid in the water. Cold water enveloped their bodies, but it was the only way to escape the current danger. The soldiers seemed to have missed them, and the two men suffocated quietly in the water. The river water was cold, and Elena's whole body trembled. But Haman did not let go of her hand even for a moment. He whispered quietly to her, "It's not over yet. You need to stay in the water a little longer." Flashlight beams passed over their heads, and the sounds of soldiers searching the riverside were heard. Elena held her breath and closed her eyes. The cold water felt like it was pressing down on her lungs, but she couldn't move. Haman held her hand tightly and signaled for her to calm down. After a few minutes, the sounds of the soldiers began to fade away. Haman slowly raised his head and looked around. "It's okay now, but we have to hurry." They carefully got out of the water and walked along the river's edge. Their damp clothes made them even heavier, but neither of them gave up. After walking along the river for a while, Haman pointed to a small hut seen in the distance. "You can hide there for a while." They quietly entered the hut. Inside, there was only traces of old furniture and dust. Haman locked the door and told Elena to sit down. "We need to rest here for a while. You look so bad." Elena raised her hand and touched her face. My fingertips were cold and my body was shaking. But she shook her head and said, "We have to keep going. I can't stay here for long." Haman looked at her for a moment and then nodded. "Okay, but it means nothing if you fall here. Take a break, even if it's just for a few minutes," he said, holding out some dry clothes to her. "Change into this. It becomes more dangerous if it stays wet." Elena followed his words, while Haman looked outside the cabin to check for movement around him. He knew that they were not yet completely free from the soldier surveillance. "Haman," Elena called quietly. He looked back at her and answered. "Why are you helping me like this?" He said with a sigh. "I told you, this is what I believe is right. And maybe if you hadn't come here, I wouldn't have had a chance to reconsider my life." Elena was silent for a moment at his words. She realized how much he had sacrificed for her, and she learned what a brave man he was. She said quietly, "Thanks to you, I was able to come this far." "Thank you so much," Haman said with a smile. "We're not done yet. If you follow this river further, you can reach near the border. But the last step will be the most dangerous." After a short rest, they set out again. While walking along the riverside, they stopped several times to check the movements of the soldiers. But fortunately, their route seemed safe. When they arrived near the border, Haman raised his hand and signaled for them to stop. "Look over there," he pointed to a guard post in the distance. "You have to pass that guard post. But there's always someone guarding that place." Elena felt afraid when she heard his words, but he looked at her with determination in his eyes and said, "This is the moment you have to believe. I'll find a way to disperse them. In the meantime, you must cross this river." "Then what about you?" Elena asked worriedly. Haman said with a smile, I will be fine. This is my hometown. I know this place well." Elena tried to hold back tears after hearing his words. She knew how much risk he was taking for her, but she decided to respect his decision. "I promise. I'll make sure you survive, and we'll meet again." Haman nodded and said, "I promise," he said, leading her to the path by the river. "Follow this road, and you will reach a safe area. Take care." Elena held his hand tightly and spoke for the last time. "Thank you. Thanks to you, I have hope." Haman watched her and prayed that she would make it safely to the end, and he walked back into danger for her. Elena walked slowly along the river path that Haman had mentioned. His last words played repeatedly in her mind. "I promise," but deep down, she felt afraid that the promise might have been mere comfort. His sacrifice was too great, and she wasn't sure if he would survive this dangerous situation. Step by step, she was getting closer and closer to the border. She could see small lights twinkling in the distance. That was the place she had to reach safely. But the road was never an easy one. She could still feel the movement of soldiers around her, and she had to keep hiding to avoid their eyes. She paused for a moment and looked back. Haman whispered quietly, thinking that he might be watching her from somewhere. "I hope you're safe too." At that moment, a gunshot rang out from beyond the forest. Elena crouched in surprise, and her heart began to beat like crazy. She flashed the worst-case scenario in her head. Couldn't it be something happened to Haman? Even though she knew she had to move forward, she didn't let up. Tears moistened the corners of her eyes. "I can't stop here," she told herself, and started walking again. While moving along the river, she focused her attention on the sounds around her. The last few meters felt the longest. Finally, she crossed a small wooden bridge and could see that the village in the distance would be a safe haven for her. A few days later, Elena was preparing for a new beginning in a safe area across the border. But her heart was still heavy. No news was heard from Haman, the man who helped her, the man who protected her even at the cost of his own safety. She described the incident to local officials, but did not name Haman. "I have to protect him," she told herself. She hoped he was still safe, but reality was harsh. All she had was a glimmer of hope. She started a new life, but was unable to fill the emptiness that remained in the back of her heart. She wondered what she could do for Haman, so she decided not to forget his sacrifice. She began looking for a way to let the world know what she had been through and the courage he had shown without making his name known to the world. Although he was no longer with her, his presence changed the direction of her life. She wasn't the same person she used to be. She was no longer someone who simply lived for her own success, but became someone who worked to change the lives of others. Haman's story did not end here. There were rumors in the village that he had been in contact with an outsider, but no one knew his name. He sorted everything out in his own way and went back to his life. But her presence remained in his heart. One day, as he was walking along the river, he looked in the direction she had left and smiled quietly. "I hope you arrived safely." That's enough. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. What difference can stories full of courage and hope like Haman and Elena make in our lives? Like and share more people, it helps us deliver this touching story to everyone. And if you don't want to miss out on another story that will touch your heart, please click the subscribe button.